Well, welcome. Good morning. I'm Larissa Crayer. I am the chair of the collection management section, and I'm very happy to have our presentation, our webinar this morning. We have two great speakers. Unfortunately, one of our speakers, William Modrick, was not able to attend, but I think we still have two very wonderful presentations, and it gives them a little bit more time to kind of go into their experiences. Just a few housekeeping things. We are recording, so this session will be sent out to registrants in the next few days. We're also hoping to make it available on our microsite in the next few weeks, hopefully, so you can share it after that. Also, we will be doing a question and answer at the end, so feel free to, as the presenters are talking, put your questions in the chat and we will answer them at the end. If you can note which presenter your question is toward, unless it's to both of them, that'll help us in the end when we're going over the questions and answers. So I think
William just entered. I could be wrong though.
You did.
Hello.
Hi, apologies.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, that is great. I will make sure I can make you co-host so that you can share your screen when we get there. Right. Wonderful. So we have everyone in attendance. So then definitely I don't want to straggle any longer. So I will pass it over to Jen King, who will be our first presenter today. Jen, I think you're on mute.
You were right. I will start again. Thank you to the collection management section for inviting me to participate. This was all events. I'm going to talk about a mold and then followed by a move of materials that happened in 2018. And so it was fun to sort of go back. Surprisingly, it was fun sort of to go back and remember the things that we had done. So just to sort of set the scene, George Washington University is a large research institution in Washington, D.C. Special Collections is part of the library. We have 9 staff, and as a small unit, we do a lot of team projects involving all or a majority of us. This is the basement space that I'm going to be talking about. Our main collecting areas are the history of the university, history of Washington, D.C., American labor history, and the archives of the National Education Association. So this is the basement space where we had the mold outbreak. Prior to the mold outbreak, this space held approximately 72,000 books. It was a mix of what you would traditionally think of as rare books based on importance, scarcity, age, physical and aesthetic properties, as well as more modern books that supported the research in our primary collecting areas. The space held approximately about 500 archival boxes. That was a mix of processed and unprocessed. We have 28 map cases and the odds and ends that everyone has, furniture, supplies, and a large processing table. We're actually super lucky to have this space and we know it. In late September of 2017, staff saw mold on some books, and a walkthrough of our stacks revealed that about 30% of the book collection had visible mold, and it was pervasive throughout the stacks. This particular mold liked a type of binding, it looked like, and so it wasn't every book, but it was a lot of books. And for somebody who had never really seen a large mold outbreak, it was quite scary. We didn't see any mold on boxes or on paper records inside the boxes. This space had traditionally been extremely cold, so it was a bit of a surprise that we were seeing what we saw. So the outline for this discussion is I'm going to talk about the university support we received, how we chose the remediation company, and then the work that was done, the large-scale move of materials that follow the remediation, and the benefits and the continued challenges that we've had. So just to set the timeline, so as I said, we discovered the mold in 2017 in September. The work to remediate and address the environmental instability, it began immediately, but I would say that it actually continues, it's ongoing. The remediation itself took place in May of 2018, so quite a time between when we discovered it and when we actually got it remediated. And the material relocation move was between May and August of 2018, with again lingering projects that went through into 2019. So we had a lot of support from the university actually for this. The library's response was to immediately shut down the space. Nothing went in, nothing went out. We alerted risk management and facilities, which started sort of parallel tracks of support. The University Health and Emergency Management Unit came and checked the space and talked to staff. And from their expertise, they decided that the space was relatively safe in the sense that people could go in and out, but nobody should work in that space. So we relocated students who had been working in that space. Risk management wanted to understand the causation so that they could work with the university insurance carrier and figure out if they could recuperate costs. And facilities needed to obviously to stabilize the environment. The HVAC team actually concluded that there was no physical damage or malfunction to the HVAC system. So they really never came up with a reason why this had happened. I still think that it was an environmental situation. I mean, I think that it was the HVAC system, but there was no sort of proof of that. So facilities basically agreed to pay for the cost of the remediation. And facilities also began working to try and stabilize the space. And that work is ongoing. They really couldn't agree on a long-term solution. I think it was probably just too expensive in a building that there is hopes for significant renovation at times. And so they decided to put dehumidifiers in the space. And I would say that we have had sort of mixed results from that solution. And I'll talk about that a little later. So the associate dean started the work to reach out to local companies, local remediation vendors, and also get reviews and references from colleagues. So this is a mold remediation vendor checklist from the Harvard Preservation Service, and it's terrific. It goes into a lot of depth about what types of questions you can ask, about different types of situations you'll encounter. So it was super valuable to be able to go to colleagues at other institutions and say, what have you experienced and how can you assist us? And we got a lot of really good advice. We invited 3 companies to visit and provide their plans for remediation. The biggest question that we had was, would we send the books out for cleaning, or would we do that work in the space where the books were, which I actually didn't even think was an option, but quickly became the easiest one for us to do. And that might have been based on size, based on the fact that we had a lot of space where the vendor could work. So that's what we decided to go with. And so they set up these sort of, what they called the decon chambers, but the remediation was a crew of 10 with 1 supervisor. They took 10 days to do the work, and they basically set up this decon chamber, and the books that had visible mold and the books on either side of the books that had visible mold would be removed from the shelves, and they would go into this chamber. They would be HEPA vacuumed, they would be wiped down, and then they would sit and wait till they were thoroughly dried before they would be returned. In the meantime, the shelves were wiped down. If there were books that were still on the shelf that hadn't been impacted, those were wiped down. So they basically created clean space as they moved through and then returned the books to the shelves. The boxes were HEPA vacuumed. We didn't do anything inside the boxes, but the outside of the boxes, all the contents of the map folders or the map drawers were removed, and everything was wiped down and clean. So they really did a thorough cleaning of the whole space. And they just really poured a lot of people into it. That's why they could do it in such a quick time frame. This is actually that whole space. And as I said, we know that we are blessed to have this much storage space really, and this much space for processing. But we were also able to leverage some things going on in the library to get further support. It was probably about a couple years earlier that the Dean of Libraries had commissioned a plan to basically renovate the entire building. She has a space plan project. And one of the things that we were asked to do is reduce our footprint. So we had already a little bit been reducing our footprint, but sort of nibbling around the edges. And so we were able to say, look, if you want us to get this material out of there, we have an unstable space, you want this space back anyways. So we were able to leverage that to getting additional funding for temporary staff and for supplies that we would need, and to make this a higher priority for staff. So the move itself was mostly arranged B there, you'll see, and we divided it up into a bunch of discrete projects. We decided to leave anything published before 1918 on site. I think 1918 was chosen a bit at random, but we wanted to leave the books that were the more rare books that are used for instruction on site. So for that first project, we put out an open call to everyone in the library. And we actually had 28 staff and students over a period of 2 weeks. We had to pick them off the shelves because they were scattered and move them all and relocate them in call number order. So we did that in about 2 weeks. Meanwhile, we went through the stacks and we identified materials that probably should have been added to archival collections, UA publications that were soft bound and things like that. And also things that we didn't think we could move until we had put them into an enclosure. And those things were marked and skipped in the big project, which was to move 60,000 volumes. Basically, we moved to an offsite storage facility. And we were able to do this work in 3 months because we had temps. And then the materials would roll back into usage for patrons. Because again, most of this material had been shut down and people couldn't use it for an extended period of time. So we really wanted to be able to move through that relatively quickly. We also had oversized items that needed special supplies. We asked staff to go through and look at and do sort of an appraisal of materials that they hadn't really appraised yet, that were sitting there, was waiting for them to process at some point, to do sort of a quicker appraisal to sort of move things out of that space. So all of those projects were done, again, in about 3 or 4 months. So we moved pretty fast. And I think that there were actually quite a significant number of benefits to this project. I mean, I guess I'm not happy that the mold happened, but actually I think in a lot of ways it was really a positive thing. First was project management skills. All those projects were run by different staff and special collections. So everyone who ran a project had to come up with a project plan. They had to experience advocating for the needs of their project. What staff did they need? What supplies did they need? What time did they need? And we had to coordinate. So we had 15-minute stand-ups every day, or I think weekly we did it, so that we could coordinate, because there were projects were happening simultaneously. And so we all needed to know what were the roadblocks people were encountering, things like that. As I mentioned, we did one large project where we asked everyone on staff who could to participate. And whenever we do that, we had done that 2 years ago, we had done it, or 2 years before that, we had done a project where we had asked people to help with a folder titling project. And every time we do that, we basically just sort of demystify special collections a little bit. Special collections is often seen as mysterious, at least in our library. And so these types of projects can sort of pull back the curtain and show that really we have the same stuff as the circulating collection, and we deal with it in the same way. So I think it was a benefit in that respect. With the majority of our books housed off-site, that was kind of a catalyst for thinking of how we could better circulate this material, gain better statistics about it. Our ILS is Alma, and Alma has the ability to have reading rooms, different reading rooms in a library. And so we now have a special collections reading room where we circulate content to people, and people can retrieve material from offsite. All those books that are now offsite, they retrieve them in exactly the same way that they do a circulating book. It's just they have to come and use it in special collections. So I think moving the bulk of our book collection offsite, I think, helped us sort of think about how we could steward this better, how we could use the tools that the rest of the library is already using for fulfillment, and how we could use that better. And we had experience with a mold remediation, which sadly enough has come in handy. Because in October of 2020, we had another, albeit much smaller, outbreak. It looked identical. It looked like the exact same mold. It seemed to like the same bindings. We basically repeated the work we had done already. So we hired the same remediation company. They did the exact same process. And now, because of that, because now that we're like, really, the dehumidifiers aren't really working, they're not really stabilizing that space. And we kind of knew they weren't, I think. We just, hadn't done anything. we are sending the rest of those materials offsite. It's a longer process because the books that are left have to have enclosures before we can send them offsite. So, but we do recognize that space is probably never really going to be safe for our book content. And we have very few boxed contents over there anyways. So I think having that experience, I think has actually been very beneficial. We knew what to do. We didn't panic. So it was in all ways a good thing. So just, to close up by the numbers, this took basically 4 months. The move, I'm talking about the move. The move took 4 months. We deaccessioned just shy of just over 1,000 volumes. And that was material, we did the deaccessioning before the mold remediation, because why pay for cleaning of something that you decide you don't want to retain. So it gave us the opportunity to sort of review materials and say, there's no reason we have 3 copies of this, or there's really no reason we have this at all. We relocated into different stack space, about 12,000 volumes. 60,000 volumes moved off site, about 200 archival boxes moved off site. This was 8 staff at the time, 3 temp workers. We had 5 student workers from 4 different divisions. We were allowed to have students come and help us from other units. So all in all, it was an interesting experience, and I don't really want it to happen again, but I'm not really sorry it happened, I have to say. I'm done. That is the end.
Thank you so much, Jen. That definitely
Pretty
sounded like an
fast.
experience. Yes, no, that was great. Now we will pass it over to Helena Egbert, who will be discussing the fire at her institution and the recovery.
Hello, can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So, hello. My name is Helena Egbert. I'm currently Kansas State University's processing archivist. I started my current position from Oregon due to the pandemic on April 6th of 2020. For those of you keeping track, I have been working here exactly 2 years. In July 2020, I moved to Manhattan, Kansas. In May 2018, Kansas State University's Hale Library had a small fire in the roof, which led to a great deal of water damage. We were lucky and did not lose any material due to the fire. Boxes had to be replaced and material cleaned due to smoke, but luckily the contents inside were undamaged. Unfortunately, the water that poured through the building from the sprinklers and fire hose was devastating. Common estimates range at 200,000 gallons of water, with upper estimates of 400,000 gallons of water. Ultimately, the approximately 500,000 square foot building had to be emptied of everything to be renovated. I will be addressing my experience of the disaster recovery of the archival collections in this presentation, and it doesn't account for the rest of Hale's recovery, which was also extensive. So I just want everyone to keep in mind that the scale of this disaster is enormous. Throughout my presentation, you will hear me talk about my work with Belfor. Belfor is a disaster recovery and property restoration service. Most libraries or archives likely have Belfor or a similar disaster recovery group listed as a resource in their disaster recovery plans. The top picture is of me, Kay Ryder, and my boss, Cliff Height. Kay was Hale's disaster recovery specialist. She coordinated disaster recovery for the entirety of Hale, not just special collections. I worked closely with her up until the day Belfor left. I also worked closely with Cliff, but unlike Kay, he is still stuck with me. Below, you can see me pictured with a handful of the Belfor employees who worked across Hale from May 2018 until just before Thanksgiving in November 2021. Belfor hired these workers through temp agencies. Many came and went over the years, but some of the individuals I am pictured with began working on day one and stayed until the very end. Hale's recovery would not have been possible without their work, and many across Hale developed fond working relations with them, including myself. After moving to Manhattan in July of 2020, I began working nearly exclusively on preparing to bring our collections back into Hale. Without going into too much detail, I compiled a master list of all our known collections with finding aids in addition to our known accession records. I used this to create a future location spreadsheet with my boss, Cliff. I also cleaned up spreadsheets Belfor sent me and cross-tracked these different sets of spreadsheets to help guide Belfor in physically pre-grouping collections together. As I will get into later, this aspect of my planning largely ended up being scrapped for a variety of reasons. At the same time, I began working a few afternoons a week at Ag Press, the off-site storage location for archival materials. Archival material was stacked on pallets in boxes across 15,000 square feet of space. Our material filled that space. There was also about 10,000 square feet of unconditioned space that was about half filled with supplies. So it's a pretty big space that we filled up. Aside from the oversized material, typically archival material was boxed in standard archival cubic foot boxes, as you can hopefully see in the picture, and then in smaller gray flip top boxes, which were put into Belfor boxes. I'm going to refer to the flip top boxes as document cases. The way these boxes were handled in their journey to get to this point is one of the defining features of my disaster recovery experience. So buckle in. Essentially, you can imagine the entire process I'm about to describe with its different variables as a high-stakes version of the childhood game of telephone. Following being cleaned, material was reboxed and relabeled by the Belfor crew. It is significant to note that the primary language of most people doing this work was Spanish, not English. This meant during the process of giving instructions, there usually had to be a translator. No one was explicitly hired to translate. Sometimes there was a person on the Belfor crew who could translate, but they often had varying levels of English proficiency themselves. As I often witnessed or participated in actively, one simply used Google Translate on their phone or did some pointing. Some people valiantly worked with their high school Spanish, and I really admire those people. Even with best efforts on both sides, mistranslations, misunderstandings, and different outcomes than hoped for are inevitable in situations like this. In addition to language barriers, the process of transferring label information found on the outside of boxes presented many opportunities for information to be warped in transfer or simply lost. As I mentioned before, most archival material was reboxed to and from archival cubic foot boxes and document cases. Each type of box presented its own challenge, which I will address now. So document cases. Material from document cases was moved from the old but labeled document case to a fresh box without a label. There was no realistic way to print a new label on the spot. On average, 2 document cases were placed into one brown Belfor box, which hopefully you can see in the picture. Information from the label of the old document case was written with marker on the outside of a Belfor box. I would like to emphasize, hopefully you're hearing from the cadence of my voice, that Belfor boxes are temporary and non-archival. This is not an ideal place for important label information to be. Again, language barriers during those labels during this period of label transferring resulted in some very entertaining labels. At one point, we had a box labeled International Hamster Company, and it is with great regret I report we have no such archival material. This is funny, but at times it can also be confusing. In many cases, there simply wasn't meaningful information transferred, and in some cases, that wasn't Belfor's fault. That's just how it was. For cubic foot boxes, Belfor staff wrote label information in marker on the short side of the original box. Later, they took a picture of this information, printed it out, and attached it to the fresh box where material had been reboxed into. It is important to note they didn't necessarily write all of the information from the old box onto the new boxes. Not uncommonly, information was on multiple sides of boxes because an archivist had jotted information down in pencil after accessioning or something like that. I think that's pretty standard practice across lots of archives. Depending on where the label information was on the box, Belfor crew members were more or less likely to transfer it. It is hard to understate how much information we lost during this process. So these were the factors I had to keep track of as I undertook reload, which is what we called physically moving archival material back into Hale. As I briefly alluded to at the start of this presentation, initially I had hoped to move collections in together. That way they would all be stored together, making access to them later easier. Based on the way pack-out happened following the disaster, again, before my time, collections were often not packed on pallets together. For a couple of months, with dubious aid from my spreadsheets, Belfor crew members diligently disassembled and reassembled pallets of boxes so collections could be unloaded together onto the shelves, my dream. After some time, this process became increasingly more frustrating for Kay and the Belfor crew working on it. Around the same time, I also realized all of the information on the outside of the brown Belfor boxes, as I was describing earlier, holding the document cases needed to be transferred onto labels. Otherwise, the information would be lost when we unloaded the document cases onto the shelves out of the brown Belfor boxes. And in case you're wondering, no, the brown Belfor boxes don't fit on our shelves. So there needed to be some work done to relabel boxes. So there had been some work done relabeling boxes before I started working at K-State, but ultimately it was a drop in the bucket of what needed to be done. For about a week, I entertained the idea of trying to print labels for the unlabeled but processed material and label them while they were at Ag Press. I even spent a few afternoons a week at Ag Press labeling one of our largest collections. Through this experience, it became apparent that there was no way I had time to label everything due to the sheer scale of material needing labels. There was about, I think, 8,000 cubic feet of archival material that I ultimately dealt with. Initially, when I moved to Kansas, the hope was that we would begin moving material into Hale in September of 2020. This timeline got pushed back month by month for a variety of reasons outside of our control. The first days of reload were in late April of 2021. Due to growing constraints, Kay, Cliff, and I decided it would be best to label material right before it went into the stacks. After a few less than smooth first days, the workflow I landed on went something like this. Belfor brought multiple pallets of boxes to a designated area as close to the stacks as we could get. Me and at least one other staff member stood behind a set of tables prepared to label unlabeled material. We had pre-printed labels for known processed collections and a large stack of blank temporary labels for everything else. Temporary labels are strips of paper with designated space to write collection information on and are then folded underneath box lids. You can kind of see it in one of the pictures. Initially, I spent quite a bit of time riffling through my pre-printed permanent labels, but as reload days progressed, we often defaulted to simply writing on temporary labels since it was faster than finding the pre-printed labels. The Belfor crew would efficiently whisk the label boxes of material away and load them into our stacks based on where I directed them. With a few exceptions, such as the president and the faculty files, collections largely went wherever they fit, and most of the time they were not physically together. The briefly mentioned future locations planning was largely thrown out the window by this time. Despite that, as I hope you can see from the picture, the outcome was very rewarding. I intentionally have document cases stored on upper shelves and heavier cubic foot boxes on lower shelves because no one likes lifting super heavy things over their head. I'm sorry. Okay, so reloading material, Reloading material into the building started in April of 2021 and ended in November of 2021. It felt like a significant accomplishment when we finally moved everything into Hale in November 2021. But I also don't want to give the impression that just because everything is in the building, that my department is done with disaster recovery. It took a few months following November 2021 to enter physical location. That process also required a great deal of flexibility, as not every box of material is represented in our collection management system. And some material, because of all the issues I've already described, simply doesn't have enough information to be associated with anything listed in our collection management system. So locations are also stored on an Airtable sheet. The work of entering all our locations into our collection management system is an ongoing project intertwined with the project of identifying the unidentified material scattered across our stacks. Oversized material is another area that was not straightforward. Lots of oversized material brought back had to be rehoused since the Belfor boxes were the only containers some oversized material had. We often had to wait longer than anticipated for supplies to arrive. Long-term, everything we have is impacted by this disaster. At a certain level, our entire holding needs to be reviewed. As we start using our material for reference and pulling collections to do traditional processing, the imperfection of labels and missing information becomes ever more clear. I just want to take a minute and say this was really hard. I had some really hard days. I tried to explain this process in a linear and clear fashion for this presentation, and I'm really sorry if it was still confusing, but I definitely didn't experience that way most days. Lots of information I am sharing with you, I piece together through experience or understand more clearly now with those sweet, sweet retrospective glasses. Not everything fit into my plans either. As just one example, for a few reload days, we received boxes and boxes of yearbooks and other bound material. I hadn't planned on where to put this material. It certainly didn't seem right to put it in boxes, but where was I going to put it? Moments like these, when lots of people were staring at me expecting next steps, I really felt like I didn't know what I was doing, which isn't entirely untrue. Also, it is worth noting, I came into this blind with no previous collection or institutional knowledge. Cliff is often able to decipher things I can't because he has human knowledge not documented elsewhere. I know I'm getting near time, so I wanted to wrap up with two sets of lessons learned. One is lessons learned specifically related to disaster recovery that are worth considering. The second is archival practices that aren't specifically related to disaster recovery, but will make future disaster recovery easier based on my experience personally. When you think about disaster recovery, who do you imagine doing this work? How do you imagine the work being distributed? I didn't fully comprehend that I would be the primary person working on this when I started my position. I don't think that's anyone's fault. During my interview, I was only given vague information on what my part of the role would look like. So what work are members of the department willing to drop in order to help with disaster recovery in your institution? Will your administration and colleagues understand you basically have a new job now? These are really important things to think about and maybe mentally plan for. And obviously it will vary based on the disaster and how big it is. Temporary labor is a really hot take in our field right now. As I mentioned earlier, Belfor hired nearly all of its workers through temp agencies. These temp agencies largely hired from marginalized communities such as refugees, immigrants, and the recently incarcerated. This isn't the place to get into it, but those temp agencies treated Belfor employees very, very poorly at various points. If we care about having better labor practices, we need to advocate for these people too. They are also our coworkers and our colleagues. This should probably be a much larger conversation that I probably don't have time to start here. Thorough records that describe what types of materials are in your holding is invaluable during disaster recovery. This doesn't mean that every item in a group of records needs to be described. I'm not advocating to abandon MPLP, but do give it the best description you can. The extra 5 minutes you might take on this is worth it. Later, if necessary, you can use that description to help identify material, and it is also super helpful for regular processing. Perhaps most importantly, take an extra 5 to 10 minutes and make sure it's entered into your collection management system. It can make all the difference. Also, update these if things change, or point out where to find the updated information. Maybe this is controversial, I don't know, but cubic feet are better than linear feet. I said what I said. During this experience, when I tried to look up how much of a collection or accession I should expect to find, nothing was worse than finding 6 linear feet. I had no idea how many boxes this was. What type of boxes were there? Was there cubic foot boxes? Was there an oversized box? What about document cases? Describing your extent in cubic feet is better. I recommend it. And then finally, and I think this is a universal lesson that can be applied for regular archival work as well as disaster recovery. It probably won't go like you planned, but that's okay. This is part of what makes this all so fun. Thank you for your time and attention, and feel free to save up any questions until the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It definitely seems like an interesting challenge, and I too found cubic feet tend to be more useful, so I will say it too. And now last we have William Modrow with this presentation. Hopefully you should be able to share screen.
Okay, yeah, it wouldn't let me share. One at a time, it's telling me.
Okay, so you should be able to now because.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, great.
Can I do the right? Can anybody see it?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, well, welcome everyone. Thank you, Larissa, and thank you, ACRL. And I'm excited to share our experience.
Actually, William, we're still in the PowerPoint, not the presentation mode. I'm not sure. Or if you want to do it that way, that's fine too. I just wanted to let you know. I wasn't sure.
That it?
Nope. I think it went to a different screen.
It says I'm sharing.
Well, I mean, if you just want to do it via the PowerPoint, you can too. I mean, we can see the slides.
Okay. Yeah, you don't. I mean, if you want to see me, but I'm not exactly sure, Louis. I've got it shared. So
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, thank you again. I'm excited to talk about turning disaster into opportunity, and I'm all about the opportunities. And that's what pretty much kept me going through this process. So a background, I mentioned the special collections were in a library, and the archives were in a separate building across town. And when I say that, the archives are made up of 3 archives. There's an Oxford College for women that merged into Miami in 1928. Then there's the Western College for women that merged into Miami in 1974. And then in Miami University's archives from 1809 to the present, they were separate for a while. Then when they merged, they've been all over the place, from the basement of the Civic Center where the basketball games are, to the community arts building, attics, things like that. And then about 40 years ago, it was the old gymnasium. Instead of putting it into the gymnasium, they put it into a locker room out back. They cleared out the men's locker room, and that was a shared space. So we shared that space with university records and the general counsel. What's that mean is that they had total access to the space, and they were coming and going anytime they wanted. So there was the security. Here we are in this huge space. And again, about the whole idea about the archives is they were across town. And I used to say, when you're talking about them in special collections or in the library or in classroom sessions, telling students they're over the archive is like telling them they're on the moon. So, not anybody wanted to get over there. They didn't know where to find it, things like that. So they came to me in 2016 about moving, merging the collections. And they basically said, we just want to bring it all over here. What do we need to do? And I said, well, we need to do a lot. And for one, as I mentioned, it was just in this locker room. The environment was horrible. We had, probably 15 fans going all the time. Again, picture an old men's locker room. Pipe issues, they kept off pipes, but every now and then there would be leakage, things like that. But the main thing is, because it was a space, if someone didn't want something, and we all know this in archives, if they cleaned something out, an office or something, they just shifted. So in 96, we went from the Redskin mascot to the Red Hawk mascot. So they were statues of I'm going to say Indians, Native Americans, things like that they moved from different places on campus. Why they didn't get rid of them, I don't know. We have things down there, bicycles, trophy, stuff like that. And I'll come to the point there, but just anything would just end up there. And it's because of the area. So the opportunity there gave us, obviously to look at something, but look at what we could do with this stuff. But we had to merge, and there was no way I could bring all that stuff over here to the library, without a renovated space. And like I said, the environment, preservation was never down there, those kind of things. So the first, obviously there were windowless space. What I put on there, the standalone for media storage, if you walked into the archives, you were hit with this huge vinegary smell. So there was the coaches' offices, and that's where they put all the negatives, microfilm photographs, and they've been sitting in there for years. And it was so that we had these, well, it is the disaster in the archives field. But we had all these things, and again, looking at what I needed over here, what we needed over in the library to bring these materials over. And I was dealing with
William, I'm just going to cut the slides aren't advancing. I think you might be sharing the wrong screen to advance. There we go. Yes.
What do you see now?
I see we're still in the PowerPoint, but we can see the negatives and films have suffered damage due to.
Okay. All right.
So if you just want to scroll down through there, I think that.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like I said.
Yep.
All right. I apologize. It's okay. It's not my first Zoom, but hey. So again, so prior to the merger, again, so this was a building that was a former gymnasium, and Miami's freshmen and sophomore live on campus, and they came in and they wanted to tear the building down to make a dorm, literally for money. Obviously, the other thing, and there were 8 other entities using that building. The biggest one was Campus Recreation, which helped me because they came to me in January with this, they're looking at this building, how long do you need? I said, well, at least a year for planning, because they can't just move something over and all this kind of stuff. So one of the points in March, they came and said, well, do you think you could be out of there in a month? And I went to recreation. I went to the other, it's like, there's no way in the world we can be out of there in a month. And because we need the proper obviously environment and proper things in place, and it wasn't enough time to plan. And I say this with respect, because she's very energetic, enthusiastic, but I was dealing with a facilities person who was brand new that didn't understand special collections and archives, the environment and this stuff. So I begged them to bring in one of our maintenance men to talk about the HVAC. Thank goodness, because they came in there and said there's no way the current air handler could handle the new space with all the, like I said, with the whole, bringing the whole archives over. So that gave me the opportunity to get a new HVAC system. So, and Helene had mentioned about recording, document everything, photographs, but I documented every conversation, things like that, because it gives you the ability to go back to your dean and again, when you're talking with these people, but they gave me the information about the HVAC system not being able to work. So that was added to the plan. And again, there was one thing where the storage, I talked with my preservation librarian, and basically if we had cold storage, it would really work. But that was a pipe dream, because, you know, like I said, no one gave me a budget or anything like that. So I came back with the proposals. We did an analysis of what we had, what we needed. And again, all, like I said, we did well, this is, you know, what we had over here in current special collections. And when I say opportunities, gave us opportunities for cross-training. Literally, if they did I'll say commencement, if there was a commencement, they sent over 3 boxes of commencements after. And it's like, why did we keep all 3? So it gave us the opportunity to weed down and reduce a lot of the duplications and things like that. But it also the opportunity, bringing them over, it gave us one big department. We cross-train. And the other thing, and I'll mention again, is when I got to Miami, when we were working, we were doing 5 different archive processing tools. So we came into archive space and finally settled on one. The point of that is that archive papers, manuscript papers, even if they were Miami related, archive related, not just other people's, some would come to special collections, some would go down to the archives. You know, the decisions were made above me, but so we were processing up here and processing down there, doing different ways, literally PDFs and Word documents and things like that. So in the middle, as I mentioned, so so I made the proposal for the cold storage, which I didn't think we would get, and again, so they backed off on the moving it in a month, and they said, okay, well, you know, what could you do to do it if you guys did it over the summer? And I'm going to jump ahead to this picture. This is an iconic picture at Miami. This is when the library back in '66 was built, and the president gave all these students days off to move books over, and it was less than I'd say 100,000 feet. They thought we could move the whole collection that way, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me, you know, moving boxes and materials like this. But this is an iconic picture here. But I'm like, no, we can't do it ourselves. We've got to bring in, you know, we've got to. So again, going and finding moving companies and this stuff. And when I say that, you know, it was pouring down rain here in Oxford, and I got a call from the facilities person saying, well, it's not raining in Cincinnati. Can they come move? And I'm like, well, we're not in Cincinnati. And so it's like you have to stand firm. The other thing, construction-wise, when we were doing the renovations, I was told that, you know, I can't make any decisions. It has to go back to, you know, it has to be a joint thing. And I was the one showing up at 6:30 to let the workers in to do the renovation. Nobody was around when they had questions. And so, you know, you keep those things, so document everything. But in the midst of that, the plumbers failed to cap off a pipe. So you know what happened then? I get the call at 2 in the morning, there's a tremendous flood. And thank goodness, you know, that the carpet was ruined. Yes, we had carpet. But again, so the thing is that, of course, they covered everything, but, you know, for hours, this water was just pouring in from, it wasn't, so I'm not exactly sure where it was coming from, but again, so it's following up on these things, but it's like making sure you're following up a document, but having those discussions. And so, as I mentioned earlier, for the planning stage, like again, so we created these programs of requirements. what our environments, wish list, that's where the cold storage came in, moving and packing, all these things. I bought so much of this high level plastic to wrap the stacks in, because in special collections for the renovation, and then all the materials to actually, because they would wrap them on the carts as they brought them over. And they had no idea that we were supposed to do this stuff. But I put the screenshot of the book. I bought everybody involved in the process this book, and I highly recommend it. So because it not only has the environmental list and stuff, but it talks about that. So fortunately, I had a preservation librarian who wrote up a POR for all these things. So I was documenting and presenting the materials forward and this kind of stuff. And so you're always making your case. So, but again, the opportunity to use one means of processing, to have the materials together to where we can use them in the classroom, exhibits. One of our well-known collections, our Freedom Summer collection. We've written actually grants on that in the last few years and really gotten highlights. We're able to do that because we're together and we can work with the materials and that kind of stuff, and the staffing. And this is the existing space. This is basically what we had. And I'm sorry to do this, but and then the new space gave us all this extra space. And the one thing about that, they were offices, but they were offices for partners that were in the library. They were basically grad student offices, but working with them to relocate them in the library. But it also created opportunities because they are part of a writing center. They didn't know what we were doing, but it gave them the opportunity. Hey, why don't we collaborate on teaching and working with primary sources and this stuff? So an opportunity came out of that. And so, and again, keeping in mind, so we had like I said, so I got the full year, we got the new HVAC, and at the end, because like I said, I made the justification, the document, and the program requirements, we actually got separate funding for a cold storage, which, like I said, these were negatives and materials that went back in the 30s and 40s, and so it was amazing to get these. And so the microfilm, a lot of reel-to-reels, things like that, so we could digitize and then put them in cold storage. So give us the opportunity there. But and the downside is for the HVAC, we had to give up one of the restrooms on the floor, the whole set of restrooms. But it worked out that way. But again, having that, but it's also given us the opportunity to create more ideas and more outreach. So when it was finished, we did these big welcoming sessions and receptions and stuff, and showed people what they're doing, because we got about the whole project was 1.7 million. I got about $300,000 in donations. So we did to show this, and yeah, I got some more bicycles and things like that from people who want, but the idea, it gave us the opportunity to read the process, again, the environment we had been fighting alone before we moved the archives over. So it gave us the opportunity with the new HVAC to improve our environmental back here. So we haven't had issues in the last few years. We still have the leaks that gave us the opportunity, but I'm telling you, we no sooner finished the move than that building was raised, and they already started building the new dorm. But like I said, I tried to turn everything into an opportunity by like I said, by approaching it, because as long as I stayed positive, and not, like I said, complain about things, other than, like I said, when they said, you got to be out in 30 days. Oh, you just can move it over there yourself. But but each, like I said, each time, and the discussions and decisions, making sure, and I put this, what you see is the architectural drawing. These project managers walked around with these nice notebooks with these foldouts, and I asked for my, a copy of the plan, because they just got to the planning stage, and they gave me a hand sketch one. So I went to my dean, I'm going, what's going on here? And so then I got the nice notebook. But I was like, you have to be persistent. You have to be document, as I said a million times, but you have to be just like, this is what we have, this is what we have, and what the opportunity is. So, and again, like I said, it turned us into a lot more. There's some suggested sources, but again, it was an opportunity. And like I said, some of these materials had, the preservation library had to go through so much because mold was in, we had old ledgers and things like that. I'm talking, early 1900s, early 1800s and this stuff, and treat these things so we could get them to where they're usable, and they created digital opportunities there. Anyway, that's what I have, and I thank you. And again, welcome on questions. And sorry for the sharing of the screen.
You were able to see it.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yep.
Now we can, yeah, because I'm going to stop sharing so everybody can see the stops. All right.
Okay, well, thank you, all of you, for sharing your stories. It definitely sounded like interesting times. If anyone does have any questions, please add them to the chat, but we do have a few. Jen, can you talk a bit more about the demystification of special collections? Did other units working with the collections lead to any new collaboration, or was it really just like, oh, hey, they're not as, mysterious as we think they are?
Sure. I mean, I think it's both. I think initially it was just, we had a space that not a lot of people went into. So partly it was like, oh, what do you have back here? Oh, books, like we have books, so things like that. But because what it ultimately led to, is we have now a virtual reading room basically in our ILS. And that has actually led to a lot of collaboration with our resource description group, with our circulation staff. So I think you can't make it's not like it happened immediately, but I think over time, the things that happened because of this, we benefited in that way, I think, with collaborations. We're a very collaborative library in general, so there's a lot of cross-departmental work as well.
This question looks like it's for all presenters. Knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently in your disaster recovery or move? There was one thing.
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I think I would have moved all the books. I don't think I would have left anything in that space. So maybe that's the change.
So you didn't have mold part 2, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No.
I guess I would ask for more space. What I'm saying is that we allotted for growth, but in our realm, we work with donations, but I also have advancement in the dean. They're coming, oh, we're talking to this person and they want to give these. And it was the Greek archive, and they gave us like 200 something boxes of, they decided they didn't want them anymore and that we should have them. But I think that would be just a lot for more space. Even though you think, I probably think I allotted for 25% growth, I should have allotted for more. So, but like I said, is the weeding. When I say weeding, but I think that would do for me is I should have planned for more space. I mean, we reused shelving. We reused the shelving that we had down there, and I should have used that. But
another question, Helena, I might have missed this, but it looks like Belfor added barcodes to the new boxes. Have you been able to use the barcodes to help with tracking boxes since moving back into Hale?
Yeah, Belfor did help add barcodes to our new boxes, and they are in our collection management system now, so we can scan them and search for things that way, so that's helpful.
Another question for you as well. Your disaster seems massive and challenging. What additional institutional support did you receive to address your disaster beyond hiring Belfor, and what support would you have liked to have had?
That's a big question. Well, my boss was really supportive. He might be on here somewhere. I don't know. What other support would I have liked to have received?
Yeah, what else?
I wish I had known more of like the backstory of why boxes were the way they were. A lot of like the information I shared in my presentation, like I sort of piecemealed that together. I'm not sure that everyone clearly knew that as it was happening either. I'm half anticipating Cliff to jump in and correct me, but so So yeah, I wish I had been clearer on that, and just yeah, I'm not really sure. It was also, yeah, Cliff can probably jump in if he wants.
If you can share some info that helps. If you want to add that in chat, feel free, or you can unmute yourself if you want. I don't know. It's kind of interesting.
Sure, I'll share a little bit.
Sorry, Cliff.
No, it's fine. I think the first thing I want to share though is that as many of you realized, Helena stepped in midstream and took on this gargantuan project. And another layer that we haven't mentioned is that we also had to migrate to a new collection management system after the fire.
Yeah, I didn't have time. 15
Right.
minutes isn't enough.
Right. So that's another layer of fun. And I think the question about, I think another component that we faced was, in addition to that language barrier, there was also, like, we had tried to relate consistently instructions about take photos of all sides of the boxes that have writing on them. And for some reason that didn't translate into action. They only took in photos of one side of the box. So that was another part that caused the challenge. And so I think one of the questions was resources. Really the main resource was the disaster recovery vendor. And mainly that was because insurance was willing to pay for that. And so that was a challenge that we faced with trying to get additional resources. Now, they allowed us to hire Helena after the previous processing archivist moved on to another institution. And so that was nice of them to allow us to do that. But a lot of it was trying to collaborate with the people already on staff to continue to make progress in these ways. Does that help answer the question?
I think so, yes, thank you. William, how long did the process take from the planning stage to moving into the new space?
I was looking at Dean's thing in the chat, which is right on. Yeah. Well, again, so when I first, like I said, when we first started talking about it, I wasn't slow, but I was making the contact because I wanted people to understand what we did and what we do and the importance of how we move things. And Cliff just reminded me, I asked for several to box everything because, like I said, stuff was just thrown everything. Box it for a move. I don't, inventory is what they say, every sheet. But so the initial process, so about I'd say totally a year and 18 months, because once and again, as you say, you moved stuff over, but it took us longer to unpack all that kind of stuff and organize once we got over here, because they literally moved it over here in a week and a half. And they would take down the show, put up and moved it over, but we numbered boxes, we inventoried things and stuff like that. But I'd say by that whole process, because getting the right people in place, meeting with the architects, meeting with the planners and things like this on the outside. And then of course we had to do the bid routine. And I will say, the project supervisor of the renovation, they went through 3 of them during that first year, and they just moved them around on different projects. And then we ended up with someone and they actually finished right on what they'd said by the end of the summer. We right on time, I would say that's good. But of course, we're still sorting and doing things and that stuff. But the thing is that, like I said, I kept telling I've got to these meetings because everybody's schedule is busy and getting the approval from this and approval from that. And then the dean has to take it up on the money side and things like that. So I'd say about a year and a half, but for me, it was roughly a year, then the move happened, and then the 2 years working after it got moved. So.
And I think we've got one last question for Jen. How are you currently monitoring the books that were treated due to mold outbreak?
The books that were treated went off-site to our off-site storage facility. So to be honest, we're not monitoring them. We don't see most of them, but they are in a stable environment where they are. So we basically assume that they're fine. The books now that's actually a really good question, actually, because the books that were cleaned but maybe stayed on site. We had another mold outbreak. So could that have been a factor? It's possible. But it was 3 years after. So I think there is dormant mold. I think there is mold everywhere. And I think we just have an environment that allows it to bloom periodically. But again, 2017 is the first time it had happened since I started here, and that was in 2003. So, you know, it wasn't always an unsafe space. I think it's become less safe. So I think once we send it off site, we sort of assume it's safe and it's good and we don't pay any attention to it. And the books that are on site, we take a look at and we're moving. And so there's a lot more observation is all that we can do. Really.
Well, thank you. I think we are at time, but I'm sure if anyone has questions, you can reach out to our presenters. And again, the recording will be sent out to all registrants and should be on our microsite shortly. So again, thank you for sharing your adventures. It's definitely a challenging time, but I'm glad you were all able to at least find some opportunities to help kind of move your collections forward. So thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for putting this together with me.